Hello, everyone. Nice to have you all here. Good morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where in the world you're at. Great to have you all online, and thank you so much for joining this AHRD webinar. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Claire Gubbins. I'm a professor at Dublin City University in Ireland. A professor of organizational behavior and HRM. Please don't hold that against me. I have spent my academic career looking at workplace social relationships and networks in terms of facilitating learning and tacit knowledge sharing, and also doing some work at the moment around how changing work arrangements like virtual remote working, virtual workplaces, and of course AI impact workplace relationships and social networks. Today, I am bringing to you on behalf of AHRD a webinar, which is the first of many initiatives that AHRD is rolling out as part of a new agenda, which is to bridge research and practice. We believe there are multitudes of reasons why we should do some more work on bridging HRD research and practice, which I will get through as the webinar goes on. But ultimately, we do believe that researchers, academics, HRD professionals, practitioners need to combine forces. University and industry need to combine forces. And essentially, that is what this initiative, along with others that AHRD is working on, which I will talk to you about at the end, that's what this webinar is about. So I hope you'll bear with me as I talk about the why and the how regarding bridging HRD research and practice. And I would like you to get involved as we're going along. I'll ping you up on where we can have a proper conversation. So it's not a new idea to look at bridging. And I'm going to draw on the pharmaceutical industry, which I have had some opportunity to work in and visit. In the pharmaceutical industry, there is lots of examples of where organizations recognize that they don't have the time, the skills, or resources to conduct research in-house. They have recognized that many of the best ideas, innovations, and research is happening outside of their organization. And in some organizations I've worked with, they have backed thousands of R&D teams and startups, many of whom don't make it, but of the few that do, they deliver massive ROI for that organization. So effectively, by recognizing that they don't have the time, the resources, or the skills in-house for some of the R&D and innovation type work that they need, they go outside and they collaborate with researchers and universities to have that work done externally. And I believe we have a bigger opportunity amongst the HRD, L&D profession of researchers and practitioners to do more in that space. The whole bridging research and practice debate can be interpreted differently depending on where you're sitting. And I've come across various arguments. Depending on your history in the HRD community, depending on whether you are an academic, a researcher, a scholar practitioner, or a consultant, you'll have a different perspective on what that phrase, bridging research and practice, is about. So I'm going to start with this. As far as I'm concerned, it's a bridge with a lot of holes in it and a lot of opportunities that we can fix in both directions. For one, academic research, which is written and published but read by very few, is research that is lost to future research. It's research which is lost in its ability to inform practice, lost in its ability to inform society. It's often hidden behind paywalls and in dense text. It is effectively lost in translation if we don't find a better way to get it out there. Equally, academic research can be lost before translation if it fails to provide insights critical to practice. Now, academic research has many benefits beyond its ability to inform practice and society, but for the purposes of this webinar, that's where I'm focusing. Equally, in reverse, researchers cannot hope to identify, do research on, or inform issues arising in HRD practice if there is no collaboration between researchers and practitioners. We need to surface those problems in order to do research on them. So that's my high-level overview of why bridging research and practice is important, but I'm going to delve into a few elements of it now. So the way I'm structuring the session is this. First, I want to look at how research can inform practice, how research translation can inform practice. And then I would love to hear from you as to what are the challenges being encountered in practice right now that we either need to better showcase our research on, or that we need to do research on. And then I'm going to pull it all together using an evidence-based HRD lens to show you again a way of bridging research and practice. So first up, how can research inform practice? So to get us started, I'm going to give you some work to do, and you will be grading your own assignment in this case, and I'm putting up a quiz. And all you have to do is read each of the 5 questions and answer true or false to each of the statements. So grab yourself a pen or a piece of paper. There'll be 5 questions, and you need to identify whether you think they're true or false. So first up, training for simple skills is more effective if presented in one concentrated session than if presented in several sessions over time. True or false? Number 2, the most important determinant of how much training employees actually use in their jobs is how much they learned during training. True or false? Older adults learn more from training than younger adults. True or false? Being very intelligent is actually a disadvantage for performing well on a low-skilled job. True or false? And finally, companies with vision statements perform better than those without them. True or false? And here are the answers. Everything in red, 1 to 4 is false, and question 5 is true. So you can now give yourself a grade out of 5, and then you can ask yourself, what is she getting at? For some areas of HRD and HR, we have a significant body of research that we can draw on. So there's no guesswork required as a practitioner in terms of informing decisions and implementing interventions if there is a significant body of research there for you to get insight from. However, for other areas, there isn't a significant body of research available. So we have to go with the best available evidence, whatever that might be. It may come from research, it may come from your own organization. The idea of the best available evidence comes from evidence-based medicine. It's not a new idea. It's evidence-based medicine being translated into the world of management, which includes HRD. The evidence-based medicine perspective is simply this. If the remark being made is, if doctors practice medicine the way managers manage, there would be a lot more dead and critically ill people. You would not be happy if your doctor prescribed you with medicine for your illness that wasn't the best recommended medicine for that type of illness. You would equally not be happy if you were your surgeon was doing using a technique from the dark ages on you instead of using the best available surgical techniques. To give you an illustration, but I do want to highlight that if anyone here has suffered the loss of a child, you may want to tune out for the next 2 minutes with regard to this example. In the late 1950s, 1960s, a book was produced by Dr. Spock talking about the way you should put your child to sleep, which was recommended to be face down. A piece of research was done in Holland that I saw the number of cot deaths increase. Further pieces of research led to this lady, Anne Diamond, making an appeal to look at why cot deaths had gone up and what was happening. And when you track it over time, it looked like this. Early work was suggesting putting the babies to sleep face up. Work produced by Dr. Spock recommended putting babies to sleep face down. The number of cot deaths increased, and then there was pieces of research done. The first study suggested harm. The second study suggested harm. 3 further studies suggested harm. And by the time it came to the 1990s, there was back to sleep campaigns across the UK and the USA to basically communicate to people to put your babies to sleep face up. My children are age 7 and 6. 2 of my family members worked in the nursing profession. One was in childcare in a hospital, and the other was a midwife. And when my children were born, they were still grounding their recommendations on what was available in the 60s and 70s, aka Claire, put your baby to sleep face down. When information and knowledge is put out there into the ether, it gets absorbed. And oftentimes it can be very hard to change the narrative and change the evidence and get the best available evidence, the best available research implemented. That is evidence-based medicine. That's where evidence-based medicine that is why evidence-based medicine came about, or at least one of the reasons. And it is one of the reasons that we should look to ensure that we are finding ways to bridge research and practice so that the best available evidence from research reaches practice. And if that doesn't exist, that the best available organizational evidence is being fed back to enable better research. To give you some examples of how research can be, quite frankly, extremely valuable for researchers and practitioners, I'm going to take the first example of synthesized research. It's extremely valuable for a researcher to come across a piece of work that is synthesized, and for a practitioner. As a practitioner, you could read 20 papers on a topic like, for example, improving knowledge worker performance. And by the time you're finished the 20 papers, you might have identified that there are 85 different factors that can improve knowledge worker performance. Now, I would bet that you would panic and that it is impossible to try and design an intervention that will address those 85 factors. However, synthesized research has narrowed down the fact that if you want to improve knowledge worker performance, as one example, there are 9 factors that are most likely to improve knowledge worker performance. And as a practitioner, that's a more manageable intervention to look at designing. As a researcher, synthesized research in the form of systematic reviews, meta-analysis, or rapid evidence reviews. For example, rapid evidence reviews are produced by the Chartered Institute of Personal Development here in Ireland and the UK. They synthesize research in a manner that makes it more practically absorbable and available for implementation. Another way to look at accessing the best available evidence is, again, through reading academic work, some of which can be produced in books and presented in a manner that's available with suggestions for implementation. So, for example, there's a book by Pierce, Real Research for Real Managers, that is extremely good at synthesizing research and presenting it with implications for practice. To draw on the HRD field, a book I produced with Professor Thomas Garvin includes little nuggets in each chapter that basically calls out, this is the best available evidence on that topic. For example, if you're trying to improve training program evaluations, there are a number of factors that are identified to positively impact training program evaluations, including intrinsic motivation, task value, motivation to transfer. However, the most research, the biggest amount of research that we have available is actually on motivation to learn. So as a practitioner, you would be advised to focus on interventions that improve motivation to learn in the first instance, and then progress to looking at the other factors if time allows. There is also translational research. So some work is produced in a translational manner. And what I mean by that is, at the end of good published papers is a section on implications for practice, meaning that that study is presented in a manner so that you can decide as a practitioner, what should I do on the back of this study? There is also some work produced in some academic articles that is written in a translational manner, such as this example here, a piece of work by Tina Bush, which basically did research on the competencies required of sales professionals and then presented a competency framework. Producing competency frameworks takes a lot of time and a lot of research, and to have access to one such as this is a very good example of translational research. And that brings me on to the second part of this, which is how can research translation inform practice? And the examples that I have gone through so far all fall into the category of T1 translational research. In other words, academics, researchers produce research, and ideally there is implications for practice within those, or models or guidelines that can be taken by practitioners to be used in their organizations. For example, an academic researcher would look at how would you motivate learning transfer, and then they would present principles for that. The examples I've given so far are examples of T1 research, 9 factors worth implementing to improve knowledge worker performance instead of 85 factors, factors for which we have more research rather than the ones for which we have minimal research, extracting content from research that's valuable for practice, such as the competency framework. T1 research requires research experts who use rigorous research design. But I want to move the conversation on to T2 research, to how we collaborate as academics and researchers with practitioners to address questions which practitioners have that they need answered. T2 research requires researchers going out into the field, going out into organizations and having relationships with practitioners. T2 research is sometimes done by consultants, and some do it very well, and some not so well. And I refer back to the use of rigorous research methodologies. For example, in the T1 research, we're identifying ways to better motivate learning transfer. In T2 research, we're evaluating interventions used in organizations to see what worked in the real world and what didn't. T1 research, rigorous research design, often results in systematic reviews and meta-analysis. But as I said, I want to move the conversation towards conducting research on practice-orientated questions. Questions that practitioners need evidence for. Maybe it exists, maybe that research is done, but it's not out there, that it's inaccessible to practitioners, or maybe that research hasn't been done and needs to be brought to researchers to be done. I'm going to give you 2 examples here, simply of work I'm familiar with. The first one is a project that I was involved in. I took time away, I guess, from somewhat away from the academic world to work with 10 American multinationals. And they came to me and a whole team of us with a number of practice-driven problems that they faced. Basically, post the Celtic Tiger, a period of recession. Many of these organizations had to let people go, make people redundant, relocate people in different areas of the organization. And they identified that the tacit knowledge in their organization seemed to have disappeared or moved or got lost. And they couldn't understand exactly what was going on, despite the prevalence in these organizations of sophisticated knowledge management systems and databases. It was the tacit knowledge that was posing a problem and that resulted in a question. So when you look at this, you have a problem, a tacit knowledge problem. So you could look at what research is there done The research that was done at that time on tacit knowledge was predominantly from the perspective of technology and knowledge management via technology. Research on tacit knowledge beyond that was scattered across disciplines such as organization behavior, but was predominantly focused again on explicit knowledge rather than tacit knowledge, knowledge which could be documented. So the ability for those in practice to draw on scientific research to help them resolve their problem was somewhat limited by the lack of research specifically on tacit knowledge. Hence, there was a project that involved academic researchers in direct collaboration with practitioners in these 10 American multinational companies. A project which required extracting organizational evidence and to add that to the scientific evidence that was there, but needed a lot more work. Another example is a group of L&D practitioners who worked together on a project on one organization belonging to one of those L&D professionals. It was an organization whose product was training. The entire organization, their product offering was training on training standards. And at this point in time, this is a recent project, they had identified that the only way that that organization was going to remain competitive is if they could figure out how to scale their training offering globally. They had identified the potential of AI for scaling that training. So they had a problem. But as I'm sure you're aware, the volume of research on AI is as yet quite limited. In addition to that, they weren't sure how they would go about solving this problem using AI. Again, looking at the research evidence available, there wasn't enough for their specific problem. So instead, they worked to collaborate, researchers and practitioners, to collect organizational evidence on this specific problem, which took them down a very different route. It took them down the route of focusing more on how do we enable AI readiness in this organization before we start moving to any conversation about technology implementation. So the second part here I'd like to do is I'd love to get you involved in this conversation here. The only way this bridging research and practice conversation will work, which I hope my illustrations show, is if we academics and researchers, and I say that because I'm on this side of the house, get to hear about the questions and challenges being faced by HRD practitioners. I would love if any of you would like to now speak and get involved in the webinar and present some of the questions and challenges that you feel are coming down the tracks and that you are wondering, do we have research on or could we do research on? Or you can put it in the chat.
What was your question again?
Have you any questions that you feel are now being faced by practice that you'd like to raise? Well, in our initiative to bridge research and practice, one of the things that we want to do more of is hear from practitioners and hear from people out there in the field as to what are the challenges and questions they face. Thank you, Kelly.
I've done a couple of studies actually on this. I did a study with HR practitioners. I did a study with scholars and scholar practitioners. I also did an HR study on the daily activities of HR. So I kind of understand their issues with practice. And most of what I got was that I don't have time for it. I don't like reading those. They're hard to read. If you put it on a podcast, I can listen to it on my way home or at lunch. But other than that, I don't have time. And a lot of the scholar practitioners that I interviewed acknowledge that.
Absolutely, Kelly. That is not shocking to hear because, and I'm saying this with my academic hat on, lots of the publications that we produce can be very dense to read and difficult to read. And it can, without training, take time to figure out, if I only have 5 minutes, where do I go in this paper to extract what I need to know in order to inform my practice? So that certainly is one of our challenges, and why the idea of translational research is very important. At a minimum, it's about academics and researchers writing papers with sections at the end with implications for recommendations for practice. So the practitioners can simply read that piece at least. And ideally, like happened in evidence-based medicine, it's finding ways to represent research in a more fast and easy to absorb manner, such as you mentioned podcasts. And I will talk about some AHRD initiatives that we're trying to initiate in that regard. Thanks, Kelly. Anybody have any specific questions or challenges that you think now HRD practice is facing that we need to look at?
I've added in one, Claire.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, Claire. How are you? One I've added into the chat is that some organizations have moved from yearly to biannual to kind of monthly performance enablement reviews. And I was wondering, is there any research or evidence on whether those monthly sessions are more effective than the biannual or the yearly reviews, or is there any evidence to show that it's having a positive impact on organizational outcomes? So that could be a topic of.
Thanks, Anna. Straight off the top of my head, I don't recall any research that is specific as to whether performance reviews should be done monthly or yearly. However, there is a massive body of research on whether those reviews are effective based on how they are run. So you could probably do a review every week, and if it's done badly, it will be less effective than if it was only done once a year, for example. But on the specifics as to how frequently they're done, I wouldn't be able to be definitive on an answer on that. But there is so much research on performance management and reviews. There is very little reason for a practitioner to have to guess as to what is the best way to implement performance reviews.
I think that the issue for managers is that if you have a big team, having to meet with everybody on a monthly basis is very time consuming. And I think a lot of the way organizations have been flattened, as companies restructure, there's now a lot more people reporting into one manager. And I think the load that brings onto managers is something that's going to surface, as an issue over time.
Yeah, it's so Anna, you're referring to time. Kelly, you refer to time, the time to do all these things and to do them well. Back to, I guess, evidence-based medicine and even the example of Dr. Spock. Sometimes for decisions that are significant and very important, you do have to weigh up, what if I don't spend the time? What if I don't invest the time in using the best available evidence for this decision? What could happen? What would be the equivalent in your field of what happens in medicine if the best available evidence is not used? Suwong, you have an input here on a consulting project. Would you like to jump in?
Well, in the graduate level course on people analytics, like we read and hear so many things about data analytics, but I posted like this message, hey, on LinkedIn, I will be teaching this course. And so if you are interested in like doing a project with me, we have amazing doctoral students, we can help you. And so I met with about 10 companies, and one company like agreed to provide 3 years of 30-some construct survey data and HRIS data. And so the like dilemma, big question the client was asking is, Is it team? Is it supervisor relationship? Is it compensation? Is it training? Is it commuting? We have all kinds of data. Where should we focus? And so we applied the machine learning, and I arranged like a 4 times meetings with the client. And so prepped each session, look, like we will study the concepts and techniques first, but we will apply this to answer the client's needs. And so we ended up creating a decent, good report, and the client was very happy to find out, like among many competing factors, like team and locations, team culture really mattered. And so like they could identify, narrow down what to focus in phases. And so that's just the one example wanted to share.
Yeah. And it's again, it's a very good example in the sense that sometimes, from my perspective, sometimes it's not that the data isn't existing in the organization. It's that we don't know where to find it. We can't interpret how it's measured, or indeed it's measured poorly. So sometimes it's simply about having a different pair of eyes that is able to match the question to the available data that exists in an organization. I would like to ask if you could put it in the chat or jump on board here. What do you think are the HRD questions facing practitioners now that we need research on, and that quite possibly there isn't research on?
I can tell you from my research that I've been speaking with them, and turnover is a huge factor. And trying to get the right employees. And I try to look up a little bit of research. There's not a whole lot on the hiring process. And I think that's where the ones around here, especially after COVID, they're having a really hard time getting people back to work and getting the right people in work.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so the hiring process, getting people back to work and getting them into work. Do you mean, Kelly, in the office?
Not necessarily just in the office. They were talking, they're starting to overcome the COVID. People are starting to accept that they have to go back to work. As far as the office, it's more of the people who are on the shop floors.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Kelly. And I see here, Troy, you've put in, people need additional insights into management assessment capability. Time can be an easy excuse or a crutch. That is true too. And a symptom of proficiency level of assessment. Troy, do you want to jump in and
sure.
put this in your words?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I have for recognizing it. Happy to talk about it. Yeah, as I think about the org structure shifts that Anna mentioned earlier, as AI continues to take hold in organizations and really keep influencing those things, to me, I am most interested in making sure organizations still recognize and utilize the best talent and transfer that talent in what needs to be suitable going forward. So I really feel like, just in general over my career, there have been very few line managers, I'll say, that are experts at assessing their talent. So I just think talent assessment itself is going to keep becoming more and more important as organizations face these contributors to productivity that are going to just keep shaping what kind of talent we need in organizations.
Very good point, Troy. I think talent assessment is a skill. There is some suggestion that AI will be able to do that now. I have so many issues with that suggestion.
We could have a great conversation about that. Yes.
Yes, but again, when we start mentioning AI in a conversation, it's an area where there's lots of suggestions as to what AI can do, but very little research on what AI can and should do. But it's an area that's coming at all of us as researchers and practitioners. That's quite an obvious one where we need to collaborate, because academics, researchers, we're not out there in the field with AI technology being implemented on us in the same way as it is in practice. But yet in the field, it's going to impact everybody in organizations, and maybe it will be after the fact when the lessons are learned and the mistakes happen, or it all works out wonderfully. I'm going to be optimistic here. Okay, thank you, Troy. Okay, I'm going to move forward a little bit, but what I do want to call out is, for all of you, is this AHRD initiative, or Bridging Research and Practice. We would love to hear more voices and have more conversations coming from those in practice or working with practitioners to come and engage with AHRD and engage with HRD researchers and academics, so that we're working together, we're collaborating to address what's happening in the real world, dare I say it, but equally so that research can help the real world with what it is facing. And I'll come back a little bit more to that at the end, and I will have to mention AI again. So the next piece of this session that I want to refer to is an evidence-based management lens on HRD practice and decision-making. Now, evidence-based HRD was brought up by one of our colleagues in the AHRD community, Bob Hamlin. So if you're not familiar with his work, you can certainly refer back to him. But it's also, evidence-based management is also a movement, I guess, being driven by the Center for Evidence-Based Management, and it's all grounded in evidence-based medicine. Nobody wants to be dealt with by a medical practitioner or surgeon not using anything but the best available evidence. And as the HRD community, we shouldn't be either. So far in this session, I have spoken about how science and research can inform practice. I have spoken about how practice can inform what we do research on. I have tried to position, I guess, why researchers, academics, and practitioners should collaborate and work together. And I've shown you some illustrations, as has Sue Wong and Kelly, as to how practice-driven questions and organizational evidence can actually inform research. I started with evidence-based medicine. I'm kind of circling back to that when I introduce evidence-based practice. So evidence-based practice is about making decisions through the conscientious, explicit, and judicious use of the best available evidence from multiple sources. So that's coming from the Center of Evidence-Based Management. And Bob Hamlin from AHRD would have had something similar. So in organization practice, there is so many examples of practitioners using very studious decision-making tools so that they ensure that they don't skip a step when they're making a decision, so that they don't bypass and try to make decisions too quickly, because we are, as humans, prone to too many biases. And if the decision is that important, we should be more conscientious and careful and considered as to how we go about making that decision. Evidence-based practice is about recognizing that, yes, one technique is, and a bit like what we're doing here in a way at the moment, is academics, researchers, teachers, trainers, L&D professionals who provide training and learning interventions are pushing knowledge out to their participants, pushing knowledge which they select and telling people this is the knowledge that you need, this is what you should do. And that's very one-sided in terms of its dynamic. The reality is that the working world that we are all in, and indeed moving into the future, it is going to be next to impossible to predict what type of knowledge everybody needs in an organization, what type of learning, training needs to be pushed out. It's going to be next to impossible to predict the future. What we can do is focus less on what we push out and more on helping people, including ourselves, to figure out how do you find the best available evidence yourself. And that could be research. That could be your own organizational data. It could be your experience. How do you find that? And how do you check that it is trustworthy evidence? The best available research. What is the best available research? What does it look like? What's the best available organizational evidence? What does that look like? So that you can pull all those sources of evidence together to inform your decision. So in the event that the knowledge you need has never been given to you, how could you teach yourself to get access to that knowledge, source that knowledge, evaluate its trustworthiness, and then use it to inform your decision? Why am I introducing evidence-based lens on the question of bridging research and practice? And it's because of this. David Sackett said, half of what you learn, this is the push approach in medical school. Remember, it came from evidence-based medicine, will be either wrong or out of date within 5 years of graduation. The trouble is that nobody can tell you which half. So the most important thing to learn is how to learn on your own. And evidence-based HRD, evidence-based decision-making, is about using 4 sources of evidence in a combinative and complementary capacity. It's not privileging one over the other. We're not privileging academic research and researchers. We're not privileging organizational data, professional experience, or stakeholder concerns. It's about recognizing that they're all valid and they're all potentially biased. So it's about sourcing all 4 sources of evidence. For those, I'm thinking of Kelly and the time, and Anna and the time issue. It's about sourcing all 4 sources of evidence, most especially for decisions that matter and that are important and that are going to have an effect, whereby you need to be careful as to how those decisions are come about. So science or research, organizational data, your professional experience as a HRD professional, a HR professional, or a researcher, and the stakeholders that you impact. The best available evidence means that we're not looking at a Dr. Spock scenario. We're looking at the 9 factors of improving knowledge worker performance, not 85 factors. We're looking at rigorous research methodologies, not fads. We're looking at evidence that you can defend as a practitioner, evidence that you can use to build your business case. So to illustrate here, there is one example I came across from practice, from a person that I happened to meet, and it's presented as a white paper. So if you Google AstraZeneca white paper, you will come across more details about this particular example. So nothing that I have presented here isn't available somewhere in the ether. So in this particular example, Brian was his name, in AstraZeneca identified a problem around, they wanted to create a learning habit in the organization. They wanted to create a learning behavior change. They wanted to make learning something that happens as part of everybody's day, as opposed to something that you do when you get a minute, or when somebody tells you to attend a training program, for example. So they wanted to make it a habit, ingrain it in the culture and the environment of the organization. They used the first source of evidence. They used research. They used research from psychology and from learning and development to identify what are the behaviors that encourage people to learn. I mentioned motivation to learn in an earlier slide. They identified what are the behaviors that encourage people to learn. And they used that information to basically create primers. And they focused on 3 E's, again, from scientific research, education, exposure, and experience. And they built those primers into a very clever intervention, which was delivered via an app on people's phones, so it was immediately accessible. And they designed that intervention using rigorous research. The people involved in this project included, it was a collaboration between HRD practitioners and people in a consulting organization who were academically qualified to conduct rigorous research using rigorous methodologies. So they knew what they were doing from a rigorous methodology perspective. The intervention meant that a group of people in the organization were included in this intervention, on this app, on this journey to improve learning habits, and a group of people were not. So they had their control group. Those included had to complete diaries for 4 weeks. And basically those diaries were getting them to capture, record, and pay attention to times in their job when they were actually learning moments. As part of this, they completed various surveys and questionnaires, which enabled a second source of evidence, organizational evidence. It gave those rolling out the intervention data to identify if those who were engaged in the intervention were engaging in more and increasingly more learning moments than those who were not. We had organizational evidence. And they also looked at the outcome for the organization in terms of, did it have an impact on what AstraZeneca wanted to achieve in terms of its values, in terms of its learning environment and climate. Again, a beautiful example of research and practice collaborating for the purposes of both using science to inform practice and using practice to inform science. So I'm going to go back to where I started with my bridge. I started with how and why we should bridge research and practice. And I am, I guess, arguing quite strongly that it does require collaboration. It requires a community of researchers and practitioners if we're going to advance HRD. And Troy, I'm now going to bounce a bit more off what you were saying. I think we always needed this, and I think we need it now, but I think we're going to need it even more because of the future that's coming at us, some of it which is already here. The availability of knowledge to people is very fast, which means knowledge is changing at a pace that we as humans can't keep up with. Unfortunately, the volume of false and misleading information that is out there is also widespread, and it's also very difficult to decipher what is trustworthy and what isn't. The skills debate, which you have mentioned, is current, and people's skills are becoming outdated faster than we can decide what they need to learn. We've got the digitalization issue and the use of AI, which is accelerating everything I just said. And as yet, we don't really have sufficient research to identify what can help or harm us. How does AI make our lives more efficient, help us access the knowledge that we need, but not damage, for example, our cognitive capabilities, our critical thinking, and our problem-solving skills as humans? We do not want to become defunct. We've got people dispersed globally, always there. People working remotely, people working hybrid, but all of this disrupts the flow of information, knowledge, learning, and relationships. All factors which we as a HRD community need to be concerned with. So the questions that researchers face are changing. The problems that practice face are changing. And while we have some amazing research available in the HRD community, some of it may not be sensitive enough to the context that we now and will operate in, requiring us to work together to make sure that it is relevant for the world of today and in the future. So that is everything that I wanted to present in terms of the webinar. So now I'm just moving on to giving you a heads up on a few things coming down the track. So this slide has a lot going on here. I'll come back to the questions and comments. So if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to make at the end of this, please do. You will see there a QR code. So if you would like to scan that, we in HRD, for the purposes of identifying what we could do next that would benefit you, we would like you to answer a question in that QR code, which is, what are topics that you would like AHRD to address in future webinars or podcasts, Kelly, or in other events that we might run that we haven't yet dreamed up. But we would be interested to get your voice and your input on what those topics could be. This is a start. I'm also delighted to say that in the AHRD, many of you may know, has a conference, an annual conference every year in the States, not in Ireland, but maybe I can change that. And this year, down the tracks this year, we will be having a component of that conference. Sue Wong, please jump in anytime you want, which is for practitioners. So there will be a practitioner-focused element of the AHRD conference that we would love HRD practitioners or scholar practitioners to attend so that we can continue this conversation between HRD researchers and practitioners. Also coming down the tracks is we are working on, back to your point, Kelly, identifying ways in which we can better translate science or research for practitioners. So at the moment we're looking at producing some science for practice briefs, which will be presented on the AHRD webpage in a format that is quick and easy to read, and based on research conducted in the HRD community. Sue Wong, please.
Well, I felt obligated to say quickly, thank you, Claire and Matt, for leading this helm. This time, like AHRD is really serious about like doing more work, better work, connecting research to practice, bringing practitioner voice and input more to the academy. And so in addition to like our keynote and dedicated sessions for practitioners at the conference, multiple entities this time are communicating, coordinating, including Program Excellence Network, Scholar Practitioner 6, and Healthcare 6. And so if you are interested in getting involved or have any questions, then I just wanted to share sometimes because people don't get a chance to hear what's happening within the academy. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sue Wong. And I see here in the chat again a few more comments that I would love to call out. So Tim, DBA, absolutely, it's a perfect mechanism to encourage collaboration across scholar and practitioners. So I'm a big advocate for DBAs. And yes, Suzanne and Tim, again, we do want practitioners to get involved in this conversation. And yes, it is the responsibility of both researchers and practitioners to figure out how we can better collaborate, I would argue. And as Sue Wong said, and myself and Matt and Katie and Sue, in the QR code there, please do include your name, your email, or any way you would like to get involved in helping us bridge research and practice. We would love to hear from you, and we would love to get more people involved. The more involved, the merrier, and the better off. So hopefully, as a start to that, many of you will A, have answered the QR code question, and B, we might see you at the AHRD conference in some capacity, and C, that you will look at the AHRD, we'll let you know what you'll be on the AHRD webpage and get an opportunity to read some of our translational work. So at this point, have you any comments or questions you'd like to make? Please jump in, put it in chat or jump in, I don't mind. Okay. Well, in that case, I will say good evening. For some of you, you can get on with the rest of your day. And for some of you, you can go back to bed, depending on where you're at. I appreciate your attention, and I particularly appreciate you getting involved. And hopefully we'll see you all I will see you in the US.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Because I